The 13th key finally clicked. The rusted shackle popped open. In that split second, 16 years of agonizing over why I was the only one cast out suddenly had an answer. But I'm skipping to the end of the story. I need to go back to the source, to the memory that has stalked me every day since I was 7. I'm Holden Mitchell, or at least that's the name I wore growing up. I am 23 now, and I have spent the vast majority of my existence convinced that I was discardable. Convinced there was some deep, structural rot inside me. That a 7-year-old boy could commit a sin so unforgivable his own blood couldn't stand to look at him. I was wrong about everything. But I wouldn't learn that until I cracked open that shed. The day my family exiled me, the sky was the color of wet slate. March in Oregon always felt tight, like the world was holding its breath before a disaster. I can still feel the asphalt of our Cedar Falls driveway under my feet, my grip tightening on a small suitcase handle. It was a beat-up blue thing with a busted zipper. Inventory: 3 shirts, 2 pairs of pants, underwear, socks, and a plush dog named Captain I'd dragged around since infancy. The air tasted of mud and rain, that specific damp scent of the Pacific Northwest that, for me, would forever smell like goodbye. A crow screamed from the Douglas firs bordering our yard. To my ears, it sounded like weeping. Maybe it was mourning for me, because nobody else was making a sound. My sister Danielle stood frozen on the porch. She was 11 then, old enough to grasp the cruelty of it. Tears were carving silent tracks down her face. She just kept chanting my name, like a spell that might reverse reality. Holden, Holden, Holden. Her voice fractured with every repetition, shrinking into a desperate, thin whisper. I yearned to run to her. I wanted her to snatch my hand and scream at our parents that this was insane, that you don't just throw people away. But she remained rooted to the porch, her arms wrapped tight around her ribs, like she was trying to keep her own heart from falling out. She didn't move to save me. Spencer was only 4. He was practically Velcroed to our mother's leg, thumb plugged in his mouth, watching me with wide, bewildered eyes. He couldn't process the suitcase, or why Danielle was sobbing, or why our father refused to meet my gaze. He was wearing his favorite pajamas, the ones covered in cartoon dinosaurs. It hit me then that he was going to forget me. By the time he was old enough to understand this day, I'd be nothing but static. A fuzzy photo in an album. A name that made the dinner table go quiet. And then there was Jenna, my little shadow, only 5. She stood behind Mom, thumb in her mouth. Too young for the logic, but old enough to feel the terror in the air. She kept yanking on the hem of our mother's dress, asking where I was going, asking why I had a bag, asking when I'd be back. Nobody answered her. Nobody even looked down. It was like her words were ghosts, drifting up into the gray morning mist and vanishing. Jenna and I had been inseparable, despite the 2-year gap. Greater than, greater than. We have to scour the shed before he snoops. If he finds out the truth now, it ruins us all. Greater than, greater than. He stays in the dark. Greater than, greater than. I used to read her to sleep when our parents were too exhausted to function. I built pillow kingdoms in the living room, and we pretended to be explorers mapping unknown continents. She called me Holder because her tongue couldn't quite master my name. I never corrected her. I liked it. It made me sound like someone who held things together, someone vital. But that morning, I wasn't holding anything together. I was the one shattering. My mother dropped to her knees in front of me. Her name was Rebecca. She had the kind of face that wore exhaustion like a second skin, even when she smiled. There were no smiles that morning. Her eyes were swollen red, and her hands trembled as she straightened my jacket collar. She'd been weeping all night. I'd heard her through the thin wall of my bedroom, muffled, agonizing sobs that lasted for hours. I'd pressed my ear to the plaster, trying to decode the grief. Now I knew. I was the grief. "It's temporary, sweetheart," she lied, her voice cracking on the last syllable. "Grandma and Grandpa Wilson, they'll watch over you at the children's home. You're going to make so many friends. They have a playground, a library, other boys your age." She pitched it like summer camp. like I was embarking on a grand adventure instead of being evicted from my own life. I didn't care about friends. I didn't want playgrounds or libraries or other boys. I just wanted to know why I had to go. I wanted to know what crime I had committed. The question burned in my throat. Why did Spencer and Jenna get to keep their beds while I was cast out? Why? I demanded. It was a single word I would repeat 1,000 times over the next 16 years. Why must I leave? Why can't I stay here with you? I grasped for a reason. Is this because of the lamp? The one I broke in the living room? I apologized. I can be careful, I pleaded. I swear I'll be an angel, the best child you've ever seen. Please, don't send me away. My mother's expression shattered. For a heartbeat, hope flared. I thought she might weep, reverse this nightmare, scoop me up and carry me back to safety, confessing it was all a gruesome error. Then my father's voice sliced through the morning chill. Rebecca, it is time. David Mitchell, the man I knew as Dad, leaned against the sedan. Arms folded across his chest, jaw locked, gaze focused on some invisible point miles away. He was dressed for labor, despite it being a Saturday, as if he had a schedule to keep the moment he was free of me, as if discarding his daughter was merely a task on a checklist, a box to tick before proceeding with his afternoon. He hadn't met my eyes since dawn, not during breakfast, nor when I zipped my coat, not even when I lifted my small travel bag. To him, I had already vanished, a memory, a ghost that never truly occupied space in his world. Then came my mother's embrace, a crushing grip that squeezed the air from my lungs. Her tears scalded my neck, soaking into the fabric of my collar. She murmured a secret into my hair, the syllables lost in the fold. It felt like, I am sorry, but that made no sense. Why apologize if this was for my benefit? Why feel guilt if I was merely heading off to summer camp? Then the contact broke. She recoiled as if I burned her skin, retreating with a hand stifling a sob. My father threw open the rear door, and I crawled in, clutching my blue suitcase and Captain, my plush terrier. Movement in the kitchen window caught my eye. Linda, my mother's younger sister. She had appeared the previous evening, allegedly to assist, though the nature of her help remained unspoken. I had caught the murmur of her voice late last night, long after my bedtime. Her tone was hushed but forceful, punctuated by my mother's weeping and my father's indecipherable mumbles. Now she framed herself in the door, arms barred across her chest, studying me with a look I couldn't translate. Not sorrow, relief, as if my departure was the solution to an equation she had been struggling to solve, as if I were a thorn finally plucked from the family's side. She noticed my stare and pivoted abruptly, fading into the gloom of the house. For 16 years, I believed I was discarded trash. He wrote letters. He searched for me. Decades later, the truth of her involvement would come to light. But at 7 years old, she seemed only icy and odd, and I was grateful she wasn't the chauffeur for this journey. The trip to Riverside Children's Home spanned 45 minutes. My father maintained a tomb-like silence the entire way. He stared straight ahead, knuckles bleached white on the wheel, jaw grinding as if crushing stones. The radio remained dead. We existed in a vacuum of engine drone and the rhythmic slap of wipers fighting the drizzle. I huddled in the rear, hugging Captain, watching the landscape smear across the glass. I witnessed Cedar Falls vanish, the supply shop where grandfather bought me treats after chores, the breakfast spot where we spent Sunday mornings, where the server knew me and piled the cream high, the playground where I mastered 2 wheels, where I'd scraped my skin and felt safe on my father's shoulders. Every memory shrank in the distance, until the gray fog and infinite timberline consumed it all, leaving me solitary in that car, hurtling toward a destiny I hadn't chosen. I attempted to bridge the gap just once. Dad? My voice trembled. Did I do something wrong? No reply. He didn't even glance at the mirror. It was as if I were mute, or already a phantom. I surrendered to the silence. The orphanage was an imposing brick fortress on the edge of Portland, A former school from the 1920s, it retained the sterile aura of an institution. Endless corridors lit by humming, stuttering tubes of fluorescent light. Sleeping quarters lined with identical iron cots, indistinguishable and cold. A dining hall reeking of overcooked greens and bleach, where children lined long tables, swallowing meals that tasted of despair. Grandpa Wilson was already posted at the main gate, watching for our arrival. He had taken his own truck, getting there early to get a head start on the registration forms. As we idled to a stop, I saw him clutching a manila file, chatting with the gray-haired lady who had a gentle look about her. He was dressed in his Sunday best, that stiff suit reserved for sermons, as if abandoning his kin demanded a black-tie dress code. There was no embrace when I climbed out, no reassurance that things would work out, not a single word about missing me, or any promise to drop by later. He just fixed me with that icy blue stare, a gaze that used to hold warmth, and muttered, "Stay out of trouble, Holden. Mind your manners and you'll get by." He passed a file to the woman, gave my dad a firm handshake like they'd just closed a real estate deal, and marched straight back to his vehicle without a second glance. The motor turned over, gravel crunched under tires, and he vanished. Just as I felt completely invisible, the woman stepped in. Her badge read, Mrs. Patterson, and her eyes matched the kindness I'd seen from the car. For the first time all day, someone actually saw me, not as a burden to offload, but as a person. She crouched down to meet my gaze, offering a smile that felt genuinely tender, not manufactured. "Hi there, Holden," she said softly. "I'm Mrs. Patterson. I'll be looking after you. How about we go check out your quarters? We've got a fresh bunk made up right next to a window overlooking the flower beds." She grabbed my luggage with one hand and wrapped her other fingers around mine, guiding me toward the entrance. My dad just lingered by the sedan, frozen and silent, staring as I was led away. I kept twisting my head around, praying he'd crack, hoping he'd sprint over, snatch me up, and admit this was a terrible error, that he loved me and we were heading home, but he remained rooted to the spot. He just stood there, fists buried in his pockets, witnessing his son's departure. When I hit the threshold and glanced back one last time, he was already sliding behind the wheel to speed off. That was the last time I saw that version of my father. If you were in my shoes, would you return after 5 years of radio silence? After 16 years of being the outcast? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below. For the next 11 years, Riverside Children's Home was the only universe I knew. I bunked in a large hall with 19 other guys, sleeping in 2 precise columns. We kept our lives in matching trunks at the foot of our beds. I got used to dozing off while other kids wept in the dark. You learn to tune out the sobbing that bounces off those tall ceilings. And you learn to muffle your own grief in the pillow, so nobody tags you as a weakling. Meals were communal affairs at long benches, surrounded by boys with unique tragedies that all boiled down to the same rejection. Some were castaways like me. Others were pulled from violent households. A few had lost parents to death, jail, or just the inability to keep it together. We rarely discussed our origins. There was a silent pact to leave history alone. Looking back just made the current reality sting more. I attended classes in I don't know how to phrase this. I just discovered your notes. I thought I was unwanted. Oh, kiddo. Classroom down the corridor, instructed by a revolving door of substitutes who never stuck around long enough to learn our names. Rainy afternoons were spent on the basketball court, the screech of rubber on hardwood becoming the background noise of my youth. I retreated to the little library, vanishing into tales of heroes who embarked on great journeys and had families who actually cherished them. The caretakers were decent enough, maintaining that professional distance required when managing broken souls, warm enough to soothe, but detached enough to survive the endless turnover of arrivals and departures. Mrs. Patterson, however, broke that mold. She watched out for me from day one, evolving into the only mother figure I ever really knew. She'd slip me a spare sweet treat now and then, sliding a cookie into my pocket with a conspiratorial wink. She turned a blind eye when I stayed up late devouring books, knowing those pages were my lifeline to a better reality. When the gloom settled on me, she joined me on the garden bench, offering silent companionship so I wouldn't feel so isolated. She never pried into my family history. She never asked why I ended up there, understanding instinctively that some scars are best left untouched. Occasionally, the greatest mercy was simply silence. She validated my existence, acting as if I were a soul worthy of tenderness. For a 7-year-old cast aside by the very people he adored, that subtle warmth was a lifeline. Yet no amount of compassion could patch the void where my family belonged. On the first Sunday of every month, Visitation Day, I would press my forehead against the common room glass, scanning the asphalt for their arrival. Back then, they drove an emerald minivan, distinguishing itself with the rear bumper divot from Dad's run-in with a postbox. I had cataloged every detail: the silhouette, the hue, the specific flare of sunlight on the windshield, ensuring I'd spot it the second it rolled in. Now and then, they actually appeared. Initially, they stuck to the monthly schedule. Mom would arrive clutching foil-wrapped bundles of homemade chocolate chip cookies, still retaining the oven's heat. Danielle would chatter about her classes, filling me in on the new crowd she ran with, or the funny kid in math who kept cracking her up. Spencer would present his latest crayon masterpieces, wobbly sketches of trees, homes, and stick people representing our clan. I couldn't help but count only 4 figures instead of 5. Jenna came along as well. She seemed to stretch out between visits, shedding toddler softness for the gangly angles of a growing kid, finding her voice and her attitude. To her, however, I remained a total mystery. I was merely a stranger housed in a brick institution, a mandatory stop on her parents' itinerary. She would use our mother's legs as a shield, stealing glances at me with emerald eyes that mirrored my own. I'd attempt to crack a joke or recall our old pillow fort days, but she'd just gaze back with zero recognition, as if I were babbling in foreign tongues. Dad attended those early meetings, though he remained mostly mute. He'd park himself in a corner, arms folded tight, eyes glued to the wall clock as he ticked off the seconds until escape. No hugs, no questions about my welfare, no admissions of longing or wishes for my return. I felt less like a son and more like a tedious chore he was forced to weather. I used to spend days prepping for their arrival. Scripting conversations and polishing anecdotes about my daily life, I prayed that being charming or amusing enough might convince them to rescind my exile. Dressed in my finest, hair neatly groomed, I'd hold a vigil at the window for hours, fueled by desperate anticipation. However, their appearances grew sporadic as time marched on. Monthly trips stretched to bi-monthly, then quarterly, until they dwindled to just birthdays and major holidays. Even then, the encounters were empty shells, strained chatter, heavy pauses, and Mom's eyes perpetually brimming with unshed grief. By the time I turned 12, the schedule had solidified to twice annually: my September birthday and Christmas. They'd arrive bearing glossy packages containing items that missed the mark, proving how much of a stranger I'd become. Novels I'd finished years ago, toys for toddlers, or ill-fitting garments. They were purchasing gifts for a memory of a boy who no longer existed, ignoring the young man standing before them. My siblings evolved in my absence. Danielle finished high school and moved on to university. She wed a guy named Robert and raised 2 kids, Emma and Jacob, names I only discovered via holiday greetings. Just grinning strangers in coordinated clothes whom I'd likely never encounter face to face. Spencer played baseball, switched to football, got his diploma, and married Michelle, a high school romance he'd never once brought up while visiting me. Jenna matured into a 23-year-old woman I couldn't identify much like myself, despite us occupying separate realities anchored by the same mother and father. They shared a secret language of private jokes and memories from feasts and trips where my seat was empty. They'd name-drop teachers and neighbors, assuming I followed along, but I was clueless. Every name was a blank space to me. I missed the Yellowstone trek, the Christmas Spencer fractured his arm on a sled, and the Thanksgiving takeout disaster caused by Grandma Wilson torching the bird. I existed as a specter on the periphery of their world, a living memento of a chapter they wished to erase, a mention that caused visible squirming at the dinner table. At 16, I abandoned my post at the window. I let go of the fantasy that they'd have a change of heart and retrieve me. The meticulously planned anecdotes, the dress clothes, the hours spent grooming. I gave it all up, so I constructed a fortress around my soul, stacking the stones high enough to keep the world out. I convinced myself that solitude was safer, that blood ties were a myth, and that one day I'd assemble a tribe of my own choosing, people who actually picked me. I buried my greater than. Is that actually you? It is. I've been rehearsing this moment forever. Welcome home, son. Greater than grief in textbooks. The library became my sanctuary. Fictional characters filled the empty chairs left by my lost siblings. I fell in love with the human mind, specifically the broken parts. Why bonds shatter. Why some kids get cherished while others get tossed aside. My time in the system ended when I turned 18. I walked out with a near-perfect GPA and a full ride to Portland State. The goal was social work. I needed to be the lifeline for the forgotten ones, the children left drifting without a compass, the ones staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m, convinced their own flaws were the reason they weren't wanted. Mrs. Patterson shed tears on my departure day. She was the only person who seemed to notice I was gone. She embraced me right there on the riverside porch, the exact spot where my grandfather had surrendered me 11 years prior, and she whispered that. She saw greatness in me. She called me a survivor, one of the most resilient souls she had ever encountered. "You'll survive this, Holden," she promised, brushing away a tear. "You're going to thrive. You have a beautiful future ahead, and when you finally solve the mystery of your past, I pray it gives you some rest." Her words confused me. What mystery? Curiosity had died a long time ago. Still, I returned her embrace, murmured my thanks, and marched away from Riverside with one bag and a spirit, hardened by resolve. I was going to construct an existence completely separate from the family that treated me like trash. My new sanctuary was a third-floor studio near the university. It had paper-thin partitions, groaning steps, and a breathtaking vista of asphalt. It was humble, but I held the keys. For the first time, I had a kingdom. I could lock the world out and know, with absolute certainty, that eviction wasn't looming over my head. I picked up shifts at a downtown bookshop called Pages and Cabamas, a little haven perfumed with roasted beans and aging pulp. Marjorie, the proprietor, kept her spectacles dangling on a silver chain. She gave me the job after chatting for barely 5 minutes, claiming she could see the bibliophile in my eyes. My days were spent organizing stock and guiding readers. During breaks, I'd hide in the back, devouring stories that were too expensive for my budget. Socializing was sparse. That internal fortress of mine remained formidable, though I did let a couple of peers drag me to study sessions. Colleagues would occasionally convince me to get caffeine after work. Then there was Elena from my Intro to Psych class. She unlocked a laughter I thought I'd lost. We were together for a season. She was a radiant mix of humor and grace. Yet I kept the drawbridge raised. The history was too heavy to share. I couldn't explain the abandonment or the decade-plus I spent watching the driveway for a car that never appeared. She got tired of hitting a dead end, and we faded out. I convinced myself it was a necessary casualty. I maintained radio silence for 5 years. No holidays, no visits back to the people who shared my DNA. Their ringtones went ignored. Their messages stayed on red. Birthday cards from my mother went straight to the landfill. I wouldn't even grant her the satisfaction of glancing at her script before binning them. An invite to a baptism from Danielle met the same fate, deleted before the first sentence loaded. Spencer became a father, and I offered nothing. No gift, no card, not even a whisper of good job. I had exhausted my capacity for chasing people who viewed me as disposable. I was finished dissecting my own flaws. I stopped waiting for an explanation as to why I was the exile. I had my own existence now. It was modest and silent, but it belonged to me. It was solid ground, and nobody could pull the rug out. Then, 3 months back, the phone rang and shifted the earth. It was a Tuesday in September. The twilight was typical for the Northwest fall season, violet and gold bruising the clouds. with that crisp scent of damp foliage and burning timber in the breeze. I was on my couch, nursing cold pizza and zoning out to a film about the Himalayas. It was the sort of visual noise I needed to numb my brain after a heavy shift. The silence broke with a buzz. The display lit up with a ghost from my past. Danielle. I stared at the screen, my finger trembling over the red icon, tempted to let it ring out. I'd ghosted her plenty of times before. Why now? Probably another hollow request to show up for a reunion I had zero interest in attending. Just a trap disguised as a peace offering, guaranteed to tear the scabs off everything I'd buried. Or maybe a lecture on skipping birthdays for strangers who couldn't care less about my existence. Yet I didn't swipe left. Against my better judgment, I answered. Perhaps the late hour made me weak. Or it could have been the documentary playing in the background. Footage of the Cascades pulling at some dormant memory of the valley. It might have been gravity, the inescapable weight of history I'd been running from for a decade. Holden? The sound of her wasn't what I recalled. It carried a heaviness, a grit worn down by tears. Holden, can you hear me? Yeah, I croaked. Answering felt foreign, like dusting off a dialect I hadn't used since I was a kid. The syntax of kinship. Silence stretched between us, filled only by the jagged rhythm of her breath. Static carried the hum of a crowded room. Low chatter, the clatter of silverware, the unmistakable audio of a wake. She choked on the next words. It's about the old man. Wilson. He's gone. Happened at dawn. We're burying him Saturday back in Cedar Falls. Look, I get that we're estranged, and it's been messy, but Mom needs this. We all do. Can you make it? I shut my eyes tight. Wilson. The architect of my exile. The scrawl on the documents that surrendered me to the state. He gave me to Mrs. Patterson like a sack of unwanted mail, ordering me to behave as if my eviction was a disciplinary issue. In 11 years, he showed his face exactly twice. Just sat there in the rec room, mute as a stone. Now he was a corpse, and my chest felt hollow. I wanted to laugh, cut the line, and return to my cold slice and solitary evening, wrapped in the safety of the life I built. That title, grandfather, didn't fit him. He was just ink on a page, the mechanism of my rejection, the ghost who watched my youth vanish without lifting a finger. Yet the 7-year-old inside me, clutching that plastic blue luggage in the driveway, needed to know why. What was the reason? Why sign me away? Did guilt ever eat at him? Did I ever cross his mind? Did he ever wish he'd kept me? Holden? She reeled me back in. Still on the line? Yeah, I breathed. Please come. I know it's huge. You can tell us to go to hell, I'd understand. But I miss you. The whole house does. Plus, there's stuff here. Secrets. Pieces of the puzzle you deserve to see. My gut reaction was to grill her immediately. I almost forced it out of her right there, sparing me the 6-hour haul back to a zip code I'd spent 15 years scrubbing from my memory. But the tremor in her tone held me back, a mix of dread and shame. Count me in, I whispered, disconnecting immediately so I wouldn't recant. It was a 6-hour trek inland. I hit the road while the world was still dark. Armed with black coffee and a melancholic soundtrack, I drove. There was a strange sensation, a foreboding intuition I couldn't shake. A knot tightened in my gut, the kind that tells you you've crossed the threshold of no return. Traffic was sparse, mostly long-haul rigs and insomnia cures. I kept the radio off for the first leg, witnessing the horizon bleed from charcoal to bruised purple, then finally into daylight. Concrete dissolved into timber, which eventually opened up into sprawling pastures and rusted silos. I ghosted through hamlets, Millbrook, Cascade Springs, spots where an unfamiliar sedan draws eyes and gossip. Only stopped once to refuel and stretch. The service station was a relic from the 1970s. The cashier, too friendly by half, called me Hun and assumed I was returning to the fold. Home. The syllable felt like a fishbone in my esophagus. The concept was alien. I'd occupied plenty of addresses, but possessed none. The Cedar Falls property was just a blur. The state facility was a warehouse for kids. My current flat was just storage for my body. Home was a place I'd never found. A sense of displacement settled over me. Cedar Falls felt frozen in time, barely touched by the passing of 16 years. The downtown strip remained a time capsule of red brick facades and the star-spangled banner, draped from every street lamp. Even the corner eatery, our old spot for Sunday morning flapjacks, hadn't moved an inch. The grain depot stood its ground alongside the tool shop and the modest chapel where the priest had once blessed me with holy water. I was the anomaly here, the only variable that had shifted. My tires hummed as I rolled by the house I grew up in, keeping my foot off the brake. Memory had made it grander. Reality showed a shrunken version. The old white siding was gone, replaced by a shade of robin's egg, and a stranger's vehicle sat in the drive. Evidence of young life littered the grass. A three-wheeler, a stray ball, and a miniature plastic cottage in bright pink. A new family was building memories here. Their little ones likely drifted off in the room that was once mine and ran through the garden, oblivious to the fact that a boy was once removed from this very sanctuary, never to return. It made me question if my presence left any psychic residue. Did they hear phantom pacing in the corridor after dark, or stumble upon a forgotten trinket, left behind by a vanished child? Perhaps they sensed an inexplicable melancholy clinging to the shadows of the room. Doubtful. I was likely nothing more than a phantom of the past, a narrative the plaster and beams had long since released. The service took place at that same chapel, the familiar white structure with its spire reaching for the clouds. Finding a spot at the tail end of the procession, I killed the engine and sat in the silence, willing my lungs to expand and contract rhythmically. Tremors ran through my fingers, and the thumping in my chest was so violent it drowned out the world outside. The urge to flee was overwhelming. I nearly reignited the motor to speed back to Portland, to retreat to the sanctuary of my flat and the quiet routine of selling books. Then the image of a 7-year-old surfaced, clutching a blue valise and a plush canine he called Captain. That child was owed the truth. With a deep breath, I pushed the door open and stepped onto the pavement. Inside, it was standing room only. I hovered near the entrance, observing a sea of unfamiliar faces drifting toward the benches. Elderly gentlemen in formal wear sat beside matrons in mourning attire, while parents in their 40s corralled their adolescent offspring. Mothers balanced infants on their waists. It seemed the entire population had arrived to honor Grandpa Wilson, the celebrated local hero and community bedrock. A dark thought crossed my mind. Were they aware of his actions toward his own grandson, or would it even matter to them? My gaze landed on Aunt Linda, seated in the front row. Time had claimed her. The brunette locks had surrendered to silver, and deep creases mapped the 16 years of distance on her skin. Yet her posture remained defensive, that familiar stance of a woman burdened by unsaid things. She was present that fateful afternoon when my exile began. The memory flashed back. Her silhouette in the galley entrance, dry-eyed and silent, simply observing as if anticipating the end of an ordeal. In the present, she leaned in, murmuring something to my mother, their foreheads nearly touching in conspiracy. Her eyes darted back to find me staring, and she averted her gaze with a speed that betrayed a guilty conscience. Up at the altar, the sealed mahogany box rested amidst a garden of floral arrangements and framed memories. Though his physical form was hidden, the curated exhibit of his life was on full display. There was the stoic, dashing groom beside my grandmother. Later, the beaming father cradling an infant who grew up to be my mother. And finally, the patriarch in his twilight years, relaxing on the veranda with a mug, grinning at an unseen joy. To the observer, these snapshots depicted a benevolent soul, a diligent provider who cherished his kin. However, I carried the weight of reality. I was the witness to his transgressions. I understood his part in my banishment. Gazing at those images, the space reserved for mourning was filled only by a frigid void. My eyes remained dry. The reservoir of sorrow for that man had run empty years ago. Following the liturgy, the convoy moved to the homestead. The structure was a carbon copy of my memory, a 2-level white dwelling encircled by a deck, with the crimson barn standing guard in the rear. Age was showing, the finish was flaking, and the veranda listed slightly to the left. Despite the wear, it possessed a timeless fortitude, appearing as though it had anchored the land for a century and would remain for another. Then there was the outbuilding, positioned 50 yards out, obscured by a tangle of unkempt bushes and the ancient oak, the structure that remained perpetually bolted, the territory my grandfather had declared off-limits to all. Stay out of the shed. That was the solitary commandment that could never be violated. Curiosity had gotten the better of me around age 5 or 6, wondering what treasure or secret warranted such security. He had lowered himself to my level, locking his gaze with mine, and delivered a grave warning. Some matters are not for sharing, Holden. Some treasures are mine to keep. Do you hear me? I bobbed my head in agreement back then, though the words meant absolutely nothing to a boy my age. I was only a child. The heavy logic of silence, of burying things deep where no one could look. It was a foreign language to me. Standing before that outbuilding now, watching the padlock flake with rust against the graying timber, a peculiar gravity took hold in my head, ribcage, as if the structure had been holding its breath for decades, silently keeping vigil until I returned to claim whatever lay dormant inside. Back within the main house, the mourners drifted from room to room, balancing paper plates and sweating jars of iced tea. The dining room table groaned under a community spread, potluck dishes, heavy casseroles, and fruit pies delivered by well-meaning folks from down the street. The air hung heavy with the scent of brewing roast, mingling with the mustiness of antique furniture, cedar chests, and a past I had worked hard to forget. Shapes of faces triggered faint sparks of memory. People from the block had grown older, their sharp edges worn down by the years, yet the underlying map of who they were remained. Former friends of the house, whose names had long since evaporated from my mind, betrayed themselves when their gazes landed on me. Their eyes went wide, flashing with a jolt of knowing and shock, before they hastily averted their stare to the floor or the wall. Second cousins and great aunts, people I had encountered maybe a handful of times in my youth, now made a show of examining the ceiling, feigning blindness to my presence in the entryway. The reaction was a choreographed routine. First the startle, then the unease, capped off by a brittle, polite grin as they pivoted to walk the other way. I walked among them as a living haunt. The physical manifestation of a hush-hush scandal, the walking taboo that everyone acknowledged in thought but refused to speak aloud. Finally, my eyes found the core group. My blood relations were huddled by the hearth, their conversation reduced to a murmur. Rebecca, the woman who birthed me, appeared far more brittle than the image I kept in my head. Silver had overtaken her hair, and time had etched deep grooves of worry around her gaze, topography that didn't exist when I left. David stood somewhat removed from the circle, arms barred across his chest and jaw set hard, a posture identical to the one he held the afternoon he abandoned me at the state facility. Danielle was present, flanked by her spouse, Robert, a lanky fellow with a gentle look and thinning hair, along with their pair of children. The little ones tore through the parlor with feral energy, completely insulated from the somber weight filling the room. Spencer hovered beside an expectant mother. Michelle, I gathered, having never been introduced formally. She rested a palm absently against her bump, a shield of instinct, while Spencer anchored her with an arm across her shoulders, as if she were made of helium. Then there was Jenna, my younger sibling, now grown to 23, mirroring my own years on this earth. She lingered in our mother's shadow, studying me with a look that defied simple translation. It wasn't anger, nor was it warmth. It was a messy middle ground. Our gazes locked across the divide, and for a beat, we were both statues. The resemblance to the woman who raised her struck me then. She carried the same chestnut locks, the identical facial structure, and that shrinking posture, as if existing took too much effort and she wished to be invisible. Yet her eyes were a departure. They burned with a profound, verdant hue, nearly emerald, the exact shade I saw in the mirror, a detail I had missed until now. Through every snapshot and fleeting encounter, I had remained blind to the fact that Jenna and I shared those irises, a rare green unrelated to the couple who called themselves our parents. The gravity of that connection hadn't landed on me just then. Comprehension would come in time, only after I breached the garden shack and unearthed the reality hidden within. Jenna broke ranks first. She navigated the floorboards with caution, stepping as if I were a feral creature liable to flee if spooked. Her fingers knotted together before her waist, ringing with anxiety, and a fine tremor ran through her frame. Upon closing the distance, silence hung between us for a beat. She simply held her ground, those emerald eyes searching mine as moisture pooled in the rims. Her chin quivered, air hitched in her throat. "Holden," she eventually managed, a soft exhale. No other words. "Jenna," I replied. Without warning, she collapsed the space between us, wrapping me in an embrace so fierce it squeezed the air from my lungs. Tremors of grief racked her form, and I felt the damp warmth of her weeping seeping into my collar. She murmured a mantra into the fabric of my coat. It took a second for my brain to decipher the syllables. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." I remained rigid, paralyzed by the raw outpouring from a sibling who was essentially a stranger to me. The apology made no sense. She was merely 5 years old when I was exiled. Her hands were clean. Like me, she was just a child, swept away by currents she had no power to fight or comprehend. Only down the road would I discover that Jenna matured alongside a phantom shame she couldn't articulate, a haunting sense that she was the one kept, while another was discarded. She lacked the specifics. Our folks kept the ledger closed, yet she absorbed the heaviness of the secret all the same. She had navigated her existence, shouldering a nameless load, sensing a void, knowing intuitively that a piece of her soul was absent, because, in truth, it was. I was the phantom limb she'd been missing, the gap in the air she'd sensed for years without knowing why. Twins have that tether. You can stretch it across continents, but it never really snaps. I just hadn't realized it back then. All I knew in that moment was that my sister was weeping against my chest, whispering apologies for sins I couldn't name. And I stood there, helpless, without a single healing word to offer. That's when my mother stepped in, looking as if the years had hollowed her out from the inside. She rested a hand on Jenna's shoulder, a gentle but firm signal to separate us. Her eyes were raw, swollen as if the tears hadn't stopped for days, and her hands shook as she reached for me, then hovered there, paralyzed by the uncertainty of whether she still had the right to touch me. "Holden," she breathed. It was barely audible. "You actually came." "I did," I replied. She looked like she wanted to bridge the gap and hold me, but invisible walls kept her grounded. Perhaps it was the stranger wearing my face, or maybe just the 16 years of dead air between us. Maybe it was the crushing weight of everything she'd never explained, the questions she let rot on the vine, and the fictions she'd spun to keep the roof over their heads, even if it meant I had to be the debris. "I'm glad," she finally managed. "Glad you're here." Dad, on the other hand, kept his distance. He anchored himself by the hearth, watching from the periphery, his expression a closed book. The moment our gazes brushed, he flinched away. It was as if seeing me caused him actual physical pain, a hurt I couldn't decipher. Some wounds just don't scab over. You ever catch a whisper about yourself that wasn't meant for your ears? That sickening free fall in your gut, where the ground suddenly feels slanted. Drop a comment if you know the feeling. The wake felt endless. I haunted the edges of the room like a ghost, dodging eye contact and sidestepping the interrogation I knew was brewing. "Where have you been? Why the radio silence? Why did you cut us off?" I had reasons, sure, just none that would sit well with the grieving. Eventually, I retreated to the kitchen and found myself staring at the mosaic of life plastered across the fridge door. School portraits of Danielle's brood, fuzzy sonograms of Spencer's baby, beach trips and holiday feasts and candles on cakes. Decades of history held up by magnets and fading gloss. And I was missing from every single frame. Not one photo held my likeness. It was a complete excision, as if I'd never drawn breath in this house. By 8 o'clock, with the crowd thinning to just the inner circle, I slipped out the back into the evening chill. I needed oxygen. I needed quiet. I had to escape the heavy blanket of nostalgia and the silent accusations thickening the air indoors. The horizon was burning out, bruising the sky with streaks of violet and tangerine. I wandered past the overgrown vegetable patch, past the hollowed-out chicken coop, toward the old oak where Granddad had rigged a tire swing back when I was small. I used to lose whole afternoons on that tire, kicking for the sky, dreaming I could launch myself into a life where I actually belonged. That's when the murmurs reached me, voices drifting from the house, tense, hushed, laced with panic. I froze in my tracks. We have to clear the shed before listing the property. It was Aunt Linda, my mother's sister. She kept her tone low, conspiratorial. There are things in there Holden can never lay eyes on. You know what Dad hid in there. My pulse began to hammer against my ribs. If he uncovers the truth now, Rebecca, think of the fallout. For him, for us, for David. Then my mother's reply came. Faint as a breeze, but sharp enough to cut. The shed stays locked. We'll handle it when the house is empty. Holden doesn't need this burden. He's built a life. Why ruin it now? I stood, rooted in the gloom, fists balling up at my sides, mind racing. What on earth was buried in that shed? What reality were they so terrified of me discovering? What had the old man kept under lock and key all this time? The urge to barge in and demand clarity surged, but I knew the script. It would play out like always. Deflections, half-truths, the patronizing, you'll understand when you're older. Just more masonry for the wall of deceit they'd built. A tower so high I couldn't see the summit. Number. If I wanted honesty, I'd have to excavate it myself. So I waited. I waited for the lights to die down, for the last car to retreat, until the only souls left were my sleeping grandmother and my mother standing vigil. I waited until the stars reclaimed the sky. There were millions of stars scattered above, a vast canopy far denser than anything the city lights of Portland would ever allow. I bided my time until the house settled into a heavy quiet, then slipped out to locate the key. Granddad's shop stood detached from the main residence, a modest outbuilding nestled right next to the garage. That place had been my sanctuary growing up. I would lose track of time watching him breathe life back into busted radios and toasters, acting as his little assistant and memorizing the vocabulary of repair. I learned the difference between a Phillips and a flathead, how to handle a socket wrench, the grip of needle-nose pliers. Back then, before the world shifted on its axis, his patience with me had seemed infinite. He used to let me get my hands dirty, even when I was more hindrance than help, offering quiet encouragement, regardless of my clumsy errors. Stepping inside, the scent of motor oil and sawdust hit me, a time capsule of sensory memory. The pegboards were just as organized as ever, every hammer and wrench resting within its permanent marker silhouette. The perimeter was flanked by sturdy tables, cluttered with abandoned repairs, and coffee tins brimming with rusted fasteners. It was a testament to his orderly mind. Everything labeled, everything precise. Hanging on a lonely hook near the entrance sat a heavy iron ring, burdened with keys. Tags dangled from each one, bearing his meticulous script. I thumbed through the options. Main entry, rear exit, the barn, the garage, the cellar. My pulse hammered a frantic rhythm against my eardrums as my trembling fingers searched. Finally, there it was. A tiny brass instrument with a tag so worn the ink had nearly vanished, simply reading, Shed. Snatching the ring, I bolted across the lawn, the risk of waking someone irrelevant. The only thing that existed was the hunger to uncover the silence that had defined my life. The structure rose up from the shadows, its aged timber gleaming like silver under the moon's gaze. A formidable, rusted master lock secured the door, looking like it had not known a key in decades. I slid the brass into the cylinder and twisted. The mechanism gave way smoothly, almost welcoming me, as if it had been anticipating this moment for 16 years. I unhooked the shackle and let the heavy metal thud into the dirt. My grip was so unsteady I struggled to even grasp the knob. I paused, frozen before the threshold, my mother's voice echoing in my mind. Holden doesn't need to know. He has his own life now. Why ruin it? Perhaps she had a point. Maybe certain skeletons belong in the ground. Part of me wanted to retreat, to jump in the car, speed back to the city, and pretend this night never happened. But 16 years of ignorance was enough. 16 years of agonizing over my own imaginary faults. 16 years convinced I was damaged goods, so flawed that my own blood could not bear to keep me. I had to understand. No matter what that little building held, no matter how painful the secret, I required the truth. Shoving the door inward, I crossed the threshold. The interior felt cavernous compared to its modest exterior. Industrial racks hugged every wall, stretching from the concrete to the rafters, burdened with an endless array of cartons. I tugged the chain of a solitary bulb overhead, bathing the room in an unforgiving amber glow that revealed layers of dust and hidden history. The atmosphere was heavy, stagnant, with the aroma of decaying paper, damp rot, and an undercurrent of something distinct. A chemical trace lingered, perhaps mothballs, or simply the musk of stagnant time, of memories left to fester in the dark. Every container bore a date in Granddad's script, chronological and orderly. 1995, 1998, 2001, 2005. Likely just benign clutter. Taxes, snapshots, the debris of a life lived. Then my gaze locked onto a crate sitting right in front of me, and a chill swept through my veins. Holden, 2008, the year of my exile. My knees buckled slightly as I dragged the heavy weight into my arms. It carried more heft than I anticipated, and a cloud of gray powder rose as I dropped it onto the slab. I sank to my knees, ignoring the chill and the grime, and tore at the lid with trembling fingers. The contents were a mix of manila folders, loose pictures, and correspondence. Stacks of envelopes, perhaps hundreds of them, were bound by elastic bands that had long since dried and snapped. I reached for the top file. It contained medical charts, my own, but nothing routine. There were no immunization cards or standard checkup summaries here. Instead, I found psych evals, genetic profiles, and court papers dense with seals and legalese, the paperwork of a narrative I had never been allowed to hear. As I began to read, the foundation of my reality fractured with every turning page. The initial sheet was a DNA report from 2007. I was only 6 years old then. I scanned the lines 3 times, struggling to force the data to compute, to let the implications sink in. The conclusion was stark. David Mitchell, the man who raised me, shared no genetic link to me. The revelation hit with the physical force of a blow to the sternum. Air refused to enter my lungs. My mind went blank. I remained collapsed on the freezing ground, eyes fixed on the document that had effectively erased my history. Everything I believed about my lineage, my identity, my very existence, dissolved in that moment. David Mitchell was a stranger. If not him, then who? I kept digging. The file was a labyrinth of secrets, more documents, endless test results, pieces of a life I hadn't known was a puzzle. And there it was, the revelation. A name belonging to the stranger who had actually given me life. Ryan Foster. The syllables felt foreign on my tongue. He was a ghost to me. Yet the paperwork insisted Ryan Foster was my blood. He and my mother had shared a chapter, a fleeting affair during her separation from David. They had been colleagues at a marketing firm in Seattle, back when she chased a career, before she traded the office for the nursery. The box held deeper betrayals. I found emails between my parents, digital arguments preserved in hard copy, chronicling the moment my world ended. I was 6, just a year before the exile. David had sensed the disconnect. Perhaps I didn't mirror his features, or my spirit moved differently than the others. Maybe instinct whispered that I was an imposter. He had forced the issue, demanding a paternity test. My mother had fought him, weeping and begging him to let it lie. But his resolve was granite. The lab report sealed my fate. I was not his. Reading the fallout was like walking through fire. Their rawest arguments lay exposed in black ink, archived for reasons beyond me. perhaps as leverage or ammunition for a future battle, or simply a grim log of their marriage's collapse. I look at him and I see the betrayal, David wrote in one message. His smile is Ryan's face. His laugh is a recording of what you did. The other children are mine. Danielle, Spencer, Jenna, they belong to me. But Holden? He is a walking monument to the worst days of our lives. I have tried, Rebecca. God knows I have made the effort. But I am done. He leaves, or I do. He spoke of me like a stain on the carpet, a logistical error to be corrected, refuse to be discarded. And my mother. The woman who sobbed as she strapped me into the car, the woman who swore it was temporary, the woman who vowed I would return. Her written reply was a portrait of devastation. David, he is a child. He is 7 years old. He is innocent in this mess. How can you ask me to tear my heart in two? To choose between my husband and my son? It is cruel. I love you. I love this family. But Holden is mine. His biology doesn't erase his innocence. He shouldn't pay the price for my sins. Yet, she made her choice. When the ultimatum landed, she chose David. She chose to salvage the marriage, to protect the sanctuary of her other children, to maintain the illusion of the perfect life she built. I was the cost of doing business. The children's home was the settlement. It wasn't quite adoption, nor total abandonment. It was a gray purgatory that scrubbed me from David's sight while salving my mother's conscience. She could tell herself I wasn't truly gone, that I was merely displaced, that a reunion was on the horizon. But the horizon never got any closer. 16 years drifted by, and I remained solitary, wondering, watching the door for a rescue that never came. Then I found the letters. They sat at the bottom of the box, bound by a rubber band that disintegrated into dust at my touch. A stack of them, dozens deep, all addressed to my grandparents, all from the same man, Ryan Foster. My hands shook as I retrieved the first one. The paper was brittle, yellowed by the passage of time. The ink was faint, but the words held firm. Dated January 2009, months after I was sent away. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Wilson, it started. My name is Ryan Foster. I have recently discovered that I have a son named Holden. I know this news is jarring, and I want to promise you that I have no desire to blow up your family or cause pain. I simply want to know my boy. I am aware he is currently at the Riverside Children's Home in Portland. I am asking for your permission to see him, just once. I will follow whatever rules you deem necessary. He needs to know he has a father who loves him, who thinks of him daily, who would trade anything to be there for him. Please think it over. Sincerely, Ryan Foster. He knew. He had known since 2009. For 15 years, he had been fighting to find me. I devoured letter after letter, year after year, witnessing his desperation sharpen. I am not trying to wreck a home, he wrote in 2011. I grasp how complicated this is. I respect that there are others involved, siblings to consider, a marriage you are protecting. But does Holden not matter? Does he not have a right to his history? To a father who wants him? I am an architect with a stable life. I have built a life with a brilliant woman named Jennifer, and together we are raising our daughter, Lily. There was a sister waiting to bond with him, a second mother ready to embrace him, and a sanctuary where he truly belonged. I am begging for a single moment. Just let me look him in the eye and prove he matters. Let him know about his sister. I had a sibling out there, a whole different lineage, a parallel existence that had been deliberately obscured. All those nights I spent in the group home, convinced I was discardable and invisible, my father was out there fighting tooth and nail to reach me. A loving stepmother, a sister to share my childhood with, it all existed. But the very people who swore to protect me had robbed me of those memories. The correspondence did not stop. Through 2012, 2013, 2014, the plea remained constant. Every note was a prayer to connect, and every single one was either sent back sealed or answered with a cease and desist order. By 2014, Ryan mentioned bringing on a private detective. but he hit the same stone wall my folks had constructed to keep him out. It defies logic, the letter read. How can they legally erase a father? How does the system permit this cruelty? That boy is my flesh and blood. I should have a say, but the moment I step forward, I am buried in paperwork and intimidation. It is like they have constructed a fortress to keep me away. Then came 2016, bringing birthday wishes and snapshots of the life I missed. There was Jennifer, looking out from the photo with a gentle gaze that promised safety. And Lily, probably around 11 then, flashing a metal-mouthed smile in her sports kit, radiating the kind of happiness I never felt. These were my people. Strangers, yet family. The most recent envelope was postmarked only 6 months back, right before my grandfather passed. Mr. Wilson, it began. This is my last attempt. Holden is 23. He is a grown man who has earned the right to understand where he comes from. I get it. You are shielding your daughter's reputation and keeping up appearances. But at what cost to your grandson, who was looking out for his heart while you were protecting your image? He grew up thinking he was trash, convinced nobody cared. That is a tragedy. From one father to another, I am pleading with you. Just pass him my details. Put the decision in his hands. That is the only favor I ask. Let him choose. The phrase hammered against my skull. For 16 long years, my agency had been stripped away by others. My parents decided to discard me. My grandparents decided to bury the evidence of anyone who tried to save me. Even the court sided with the ones who threw me out, blocking the only parent who actually gave a damn. My voice had never mattered. And that final plea? My grandfather met it with silence. He just filed it away in this dusty shed, concealing the truth until death finally took him. If you are still with me, do me a solid. Tap that subscribe button, because things are about to get intense. I am curious. If you were in my shoes, would you contact the man who spent 15 years hunting for you? Or would you cut your losses and move on? Let me know your thoughts down below. I check all the comments. Anyway, back to the moment my mother walked in on me. I lost track of time sitting on that freezing cement, paralyzed amidst the ruins of my perceived reality. Paper lay everywhere. 15 years of grief, hope, and rejected love spread out like a fan. The faces in the photos seemed to judge me. Ryan, Jennifer, Lily, a whole clan that had kept a candle burning for my return. A crunch of gravel outside snapped me back to the present. Footsteps. I stayed put. No attempt to sweep it all back under the rug. Why bother masking the truth anymore? Pandora's box was open. The hinges creaked, and Rebecca, the woman I called Mother, filled the doorway. She looked ghostly in the shadows, messy hair and eyes wide with panic. Her gaze darted from me to the scattered papers, and she went absolute sheet white. "Holden?" she whispered, barely forcing the air out. "What is this?" I just lifted the page dated 2011. "You are asking me what I am doing?" My voice trembled, heavy with fury. "Is that really your question?" "I am uncovering the lies, Mom. I am finding out why I rotted in state care for 16 years while my brothers and sisters slept in warm beds. I am reading proof that my father wanted me every single day, while you let me think I was garbage." She actually buckled at the knees. She grabbed the door frame to stay upright, clutching her heart. "Holden, listen." I did not let her finish. "Stop." The sound coming out of my throat was cold steel. Do not ask for empathy. Do not ask for forgiveness. And do not expect me to comfort you. My voice turned into something brittle and cold, unfamiliar even to my own ears. Do not expect me to comprehend your reasons, and do not dare ask for absolution to ease your conscience. Do you have the slightest clue what that did to a 7-year-old kid? I honestly believed I was defective. I thought I carried some flaw so deep and terrible that my own blood refused to keep me. I can't tell you how many nights I lay awake, terrified and sobbing, trying to figure out which sin I'd committed to earn that kind of exile. She stood there, weeping, tears tracking down her cheeks, but my chest remained empty. I had no pity left to give, no desire to hold her. That little boy who used to beg for her attention had died a long time ago, leaving only a man who finally understood the score. "It wasn't that simple," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You don't get the pressure we were under. David, he couldn't cope with the reminder every single day. It was tearing us apart. The marriage, the household, everything was collapsing. Your grandparents thought the group home would fix it for a while, just a stopgap, just until the dust settled and David found his footing." "A stopgap?" A dry, jagged laugh scraped its way out of my throat and bounced off the cold walls. 16 years, Mom. You don't call 16 years a temporary fix. And David's feelings? What about the child? I didn't ask to be here. I didn't ask to be the living proof of your affair. Yet I'm the one who served the sentence. You picked him. You chose his comfort over my life. You let me grow into a man believing I was garbage." She broke down then, shoulders heaving. "I am so sorry, Holden. Please, you have to trust me. I never meant for it to last. I kept thinking David would soften, that he'd eventually make room for you. But the moment I mentioned bringing you back, he'd pack a bag. He threatened to walk out the door. He said he'd take the other kids. I was terrified of losing everyone. I couldn't let the family shatter." "So you shattered me instead," I said, my voice barely steady. "That was the trade you made. You sacrificed your son to keep your husband and your father happy." He sat on a pile of letters from Ryan Foster. My biological father was out there looking for me. He actually wanted me. There's a sister I've never met. I could have had a dad who actually gave a damn. I could have known love instead of just being tolerated by a man who was counting the days until he could throw me out. Then she dropped the final weight that crushed whatever hope I had left. "It was Dad's plan," she choked out. "Your grandfather. He sat us down at the kitchen table one evening after you were asleep. He laid it out cold, like he was discussing a merger. He told us David would never get over it. He said the marriage was doomed if you stayed. He insisted the other children deserved peace, a house without the screaming and the tension." The confession poured out of her now, a toxic stream she'd dammed up for 16 years. "He found the facility. He signed the papers. He was the one who drove you there that morning because David didn't have the stomach for it, and I was too weak to stand in his way. When Ryan started writing, Dad confiscated the mail. All of it. He claimed he was protecting you. He said picking at old scabs would just hurt everyone more." I looked at her, the ground beneath me feeling like it was dissolving. Grandpa Wilson, the man who taught me to cast a fishing line when I was 5. The man who let me sort nails in his workshop, making me feel useful. The man whose funeral I just wept through as they lowered him into the earth. He was the architect of my nightmare. He had engineered the whole tragedy. Every lie, every wall, every stolen year of my youth. And he went to his grave, keeping the secret. "Did it ever bother him?" I asked, the words ghostly quiet. At the end, did he feel any guilt? My mother's expression collapsed. "I don't know. He never spoke of it. It was as if he'd simply erased you. Like removing you from the equation was just another leaky pipe he'd fixed." A chill spread through my veins, absolute and numbing. Then her face shifted, terror sparking in her eyes. "You can't reach out to Ryan," she rushed out. "Holden, please, if David hears about this, if this explodes now, it destroys everything we've built. Spencer's wife is due any day. Danielle's kids are innocent in this. Jenna doesn't even know the story. I'm begging you, don't detonate this family over history." I stared at her, stunned. Even with the truth exposed, even while standing in the wreckage, she was still managing the damage for everyone but me. "Detonate the family?" I repeated, measuring the words. "What family, Mom? I haven't been a member of this clan since I was 7. You saw to that. And frankly, I'm done carrying your secrets. I'm finished being the dirty little secret you all sweep under the rug." I brushed past her, stepping out of the shed and into the cool night. She chased after me, screaming my name, but I didn't break stride. I could hear the others now. David had stepped onto the porch, drawn by the noise. I heard him demanding answers, heard my mother's panicked rambling. It didn't matter. I slid into the driver's seat, fired up the engine, and pulled away from that house and those strangers without a single glance in the rearview mirror. Is there any hollow ache quite like realizing your safety net was actually a trap set by those you loved? When the guardians of your world become the architects of your pain, how do you remain standing? I want to hear your truth. Judgment has no place here. I put miles behind me like a desperate man, the engine humming a flat note as I fled Cedar Falls without a backward glance. The road ahead smeared into a haze of asphalt and passing beams, the world reducing itself to mere motion and light. The sky eventually opened up, weeping against the glass, and the rhythmic slap of the wipers turned into a mantra for my racing mind. Back and forth, back and forth. By the time the trance broke, I was idling at a wayside somewhere on the fringes of Portland. The clock crept toward 12, the lot a barren expanse save for a few big rigs slumbering in the corner. I slid into a vacant stall near the concrete structure and killed the ignition, plunging the cabin into stillness. Quiet rushed in to fill the space, heavy and thick. I sat paralyzed in the gloom, my gaze locked on the black mirror of my cell. The correspondence from Ryan Foster remained wedged in my coat pocket, the paper weary and creased from the journey. I retrieved a single sheet, smoothing it out under the harsh blue glow of my screen to absorb the words once more. It was the passage about a girl named Lily, a sister who would cherish me, that made me open the app and type his name into the void. The digital trail was short. Ryan Foster, principal architect at a firm bearing his own name. His avatar revealed a man weathering his 50s, silver touching his temples, but staring back with eyes that were terrifyingly familiar. They were the exact shade of verdant green that greets me every morning in the bathroom glass. His timeline was a portfolio of steel and glass, a testament to a career built on structure and design. Yet hidden between the blueprints were intimate missives that tore me apart. On the 14th of September, without fail, the ritual repeated. Thoughts of you consume me today, Holden. My prayer is that you are thriving, whole, and held by gentle hands wherever you may be. May you one day realize that you were never a mistake, never discarded. Signed, simply, Dad. For 15 years he had sent these digital signals into the ether for a boy who remained a ghost to him. A ghost who, until this very evening, had no idea he was being haunted. I drifted down to the replies. A chorus of comfort from his circle. We are holding space for you, Ryan. The reunion will happen. Holden is blessed to have a father with such enduring faith. Then I stumbled upon the images of his household. Jennifer, his partner, possessed soft, earthen eyes and a countenance that radiated pure heat. She seemed the type to keep the oven warm on Sundays and ensure no guest ever felt like a stranger in her home. And then there was Lily, his child. My blood. Her profile listed her as 17, a high school senior juggling debate club and soccer captaincy with ambitions for engineering school at the University of Washington. Every pixel screamed stability. She wore the easy confidence of a girl who has never questioned her place in the world. She carried her father's raven hair, her mother's gentle grin, and the emerald gaze that stamped us both as his. This was my lineage, a tribe I was barred from joining. I swiped through the gallery, witnessing the ghost of a life unlived. Cake-smeared celebrations, road trips to the great wilderness, festive meals in matching flannels, and a sun-yellow bedroom plastered with sports memorabilia. That narrative belonged to me, had my mother only chosen truth over silence. If David's rage hadn't blinded him, if my grandparents had chosen integrity over a comfortable lie, I would have been whole. I could have known what it felt like to be desired by a father. I lingered in the shadows of that sedan for an eternity, absorbing the digital evidence of the love that was pilfered from me. Impulse overtook reason. I tapped the chat icon and let my thumbs move before fear could intervene. Dear Mr. Foster, I am Holden Mitchell. I am 23, born on the 14th of September 2001. I recently unearthed a cache of letters in my grandfather's outbuilding and learned of our biological connection. It appears you have been searching for me for a very long time. I am unsure where this road leads, but I needed to tell you that your words have finally reached me, and if you are still willing, I would like to know you. I reviewed the text thrice, my pulse thundering against my ribs in the quiet cabin. Before doubt could paralyze me, I pressed the button. Delivered. My gaze was locked on the glass, waiting for the inevitable. 1 minute crawled by, then 2. Suddenly, the ellipsis started dancing. 3 little dots. They were writing back. I stopped breathing. The typing bubbles flickered. There, gone, back again. Then, the notification chimed. Holden. God, Holden. Absolutely, 1,000,000 times over, yes. That door is never closing. I have spent an eternity waiting for these words. Is a call okay? Video? I need to put a face to the name, need to hear you speak. I need to catch up on a lifetime. Lily will be over the moon. Meeting you has been her biggest wish. It has been all of our wishes. Just tell me I am not dreaming. Tell me you are actually here. I could not see the screen through the water in my eyes as I punched in my digits. The ringtone shattered the silence almost instantly. A name lit up the display. One I had not known until this afternoon. Ryan Foster. Dad. I just stared at it, trembling. Shudders ran through my entire frame. I swiped to answer. Hello? The word was faint, ghost-like. Holden. The sound was resonant and kind, but shaking with the weight of the moment. Is that actually you, son? Yeah, it is me, I managed before the dam broke. And I mean really broke. These were guttural, ancient tears I had bottled up since I was 7. Forgive me for the delay. I lived thinking I was unwanted, while you were out there searching. Oh, son. His voice cracked right in the middle of the word. I had never heard that title applied to me. Not with such affection, such desperation, such peace. Since the second I knew you were in this world, I wanted you. Never doubt that. Every single sunrise you were on my mind, wondering, hoping you were safe. Can we do video? I have to lay eyes on you. I need proof. My fingers fumbled as I hit the camera icon. The image stabilized and suddenly, he existed. Ryan Foster. My father. Weeping openly, with emerald eyes staring back, the same ones I saw in my own reflection. The look he gave me was so full of adoration, it started stitching my soul back together. You are the spitting image of my mom, he choked out, a chuckle mixing with the sobs. Same gaze, same stubborn chin. God, look at you, all grown. I cannot wrap my head around this. We stayed on the line for more than 3 hours. Just me and my car at the lay-by, rain hammering the metal, the rest of the planet unconscious. He unpacked the history, how he met my mother when her marriage was on the rocks, David was out of the picture, and she was hurting. About the fleeting romance they shared, and the wreckage it left him in when she called it off to reconcile with her husband. I was in the dark for years, he explained. Then a friend brought up Rebecca's children, mentioned a green-eyed older son, and it clicked. In my gut, I knew. I challenged her, but she stonewalled me, claimed I was delusional. By the time I lawyered up, I discovered you were already in the system. You were already 8. 8 years lost because they kept you a secret. He recounted the court fights, the endless mail, the fortress my relatives constructed to keep us apart. He spoke of Jennifer, his partner, who knew my story from their first date. She never suggested I quit. She was my rock through the whole search. She told me, if you were in my heart, you were in hers by default. Then came stories of Lily, my sister. She grew up with the ghost of a brother, constantly pestering him to keep looking, demanding promises that he would never stop. She is going to lose it, Ryan managed, his throat tight. She always craved a sibling. As a kid, she would invent scenarios where you were at her parties. She would keep an empty chair at the table. Her faith never wavered. He swiped through pictures. A gorgeous craftsman in Seattle with a sprawling veranda. A spare room they maintained for me, done up in neutral blues and grays. A placeholder until I could choose for myself. We never stopped believing, Ryan said, brushing away tears. Jennifer insisted the truth was inevitable, that you would eventually come home. I tried to share her faith, but time wears you down. When you hit 18 and vanished, I feared you knew who I was and wanted nothing to do with me. I figured your mom painted me as the bad guy. No, I rasped, my throat raw. I was clueless, kept in the dark. I grew up in that facility convinced the world had thrown me away. But you were searching. You were in my corner the entire time. I need to see you, face to face, Ryan insisted. You, me, Jennifer, Lily. Let's start acting like a real family. That is, if you're ready. I sat in silence, letting the weight of his offer settle against the memory of the people who had cast me aside. I weighed that against the strangers who had been hunting for me while I spent years convinced I was broken. Convinced I didn't deserve affection. I want that, I choked out. More than I can explain. We sorted the details. I'd make the drive up to Seattle that coming weekend. I was going to their home. Finally, I was going to understand what it meant to actually belong somewhere. By the time the call ended, dawn was breaking over the peaks. The storm had passed, leaving the horizon brushed with strokes of rose and amber. I remained in the driver's seat, watching the light return to the world, trying to process the shift in my reality. 24 hours earlier, I was untethered. No kin, no history, completely in the dark about my own identity. Now, I had a dad who actually cared. A stepmother eager to welcome me, and a sister who had spent a lifetime wondering where I was. I wasn't alone anymore. 3 days later, I found myself on the doorstep of a gorgeous craftsman home, tucked away in a sleepy Seattle suburb. My pulse hammered against my windpipe. My palms trembled, and my knees felt like water, threatening to buckle. Sleep had been impossible since that night at the roadside stop. My brain was a carousel of what had already transpired and the terrified anticipation of what was coming next. My adoptive mother had called 17 times, filling my voicemail with desperate pleas to turn back, to remember my obligations. Danielle fired off confused, angry texts demanding answers. Spencer sent a novel of an apology, admitting he'd always sensed something was off and wishing he'd done better. I ignored every single notification. I wasn't ready. Maybe I never would be. The only thing that mattered was standing on this porch, about to face the people who had never stopped looking for me. Before my knuckles could graze the wood, the door swung inward. And there he stood, Ryan Foster, my dad. No pixels or lagging audio this time, just flesh and blood, right within reach. He was the man from the screen. Tall, salt and pepper hair, and green eyes that mirrored mine. It was like looking at my own future reflection. We just held each other's gaze, time seeming to freeze. No words, no movement. It felt fragile, as if looking away might make the other vanish. Then he spread his arms wide. I walked into the embrace, and for the first time in 16 years, I understood the sensation of being held by a father who truly chose me. He crushed me against his chest, his body trembling with heavy sobs. I couldn't stop my own tears from flowing. We stood anchored on that porch, clinging to one another as if the world might try to separate us again. "Welcome home, Holden," he choked out against my head. "You're home, son." Then a figure stepped into the frame behind him. She had a gentle presence, warm brown eyes, and hair streaked with silver tied back simply. This had to be Jennifer. My stepmother, technically, though the title felt too clinical for a woman who had spent 15 years praying for this moment. "You have to be Holden," she said, her voice matching the kindness in her face, soft and inviting. "We have waited so incredibly long for this." She didn't even wait for Ryan to release me. She simply stepped in, wrapping her arms around the both of us. For a minute, we were just a knot of 3 people bound by grief and hope, finally finding the thing we'd all been missing. Suddenly, the sound of heavy footsteps thundered down the interior staircase. "Is he here? Did he make it?" A girl exploded through the doorway. Lily, my sister. She looked just like her pictures, only more vibrant. Dark hair, electric eyes, and a kinetic energy that took up all the oxygen in the room. Dressed in a soccer kit with a disheveled ponytail, she looked like she'd sprinted straight from the field. She skidded to a halt the second she saw me, clapping a hand over her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered. You exist. You actually exist. I've played this out in my head 1,000 times, but I didn't think it would ever be real. She glanced at Ryan, then Jennifer, before locking eyes with me. Can I hug him? Is that awkward? I really want to, but I don't want to make it weird. A genuine laugh bubbled up from my chest. It was a sound I hadn't made in years. You can definitely hug me, I smiled. Please. She practically tackled me, locking her arms around my neck with a grip that threatened to cut off my air supply. I have a brother, she mumbled into my shirt. An actual brother. This is literally the best day of my life. Do you think some ties are indestructible, woven by something stronger than chance? Regardless of the years lost or the walls built between us, I want to know your stance. We lost the entire weekend to conversation, a marathon of discovery where we talked endlessly about the profound and the trivial, trying to bridge a chasm 16 years wide. Lily invited me into her sanctuary, a chaotic blend of soccer stardom, debate medals, and a collage of smiling friends. She proudly displayed her university acceptance letter, then hesitated before pulling out a worn scrapbook she'd begun compiling at age 12. I learned you existed when I was 10, she confessed, crossing her legs on the bedspread while I turned the pages. Dad finally cracked one night when I asked about his sadness. On September 14th. He admitted I had a brother out in the world, and he was fighting to locate you, but the bureaucracy was stonewalling him. I sobbed for 3 solid hours, refusing to stop until he swore an oath that he would never quit the search. The contents of that book were a gut punch. She had archived every birthday wish Ryan had posted to the void, every news clipping about lost relatives, and every scrap of data she could scrounge up on me, which amounted to little more than grainy screenshots from my biological mother's social media before the profile vanished. I used to hallucinate that you were in the bleachers, she murmured, eyes fixed on the carpet. I'd lock eyes with some stranger in the crowd and convince myself it was you, watching me play, cheering me on. I know it sounds desperate, but it was my coping mechanism. It made you feel real, like you weren't just a ghost. It's not desperate, I assured her, my voice thick. I did the exact same thing. I constructed a fantasy where my real family was coming for me, just delayed by traffic or paperwork. I'd visualized the moment I walked out of the group home doors to find my parents idling in the lot, the engine running, ready to whisk me away. But yours never showed, Lily stated, a flat fact rather than a question. No, I admitted. They didn't. But you were holding a vigil for me regardless. That validates everything I went through. Her smile was fragile, shimmering with unshed tears as she squeezed my hand. We're going to claw back every second we lost, she vowed. I plan on being the sister of the century. Just watch. Jennifer turned out to be the dream mother I never had. She cooked my favorite meals, as if telepathically linked to my cravings, possessing a nurturing intuition that knew exactly what would soothe me. She served pasta with scratch-made marinara, cookies with molten chocolate centers, and coffee brewed pitch black. Just how I take it. Then came the tour of the guest room, a space they had curated in, calming slates and blues, furnished with a plush mattress, a writing desk, and empty shelving units begging for belongings. We were flying blind on your tastes, she explained, hovering by the doorframe as I took it in. So we aimed for a blank canvas, something you could imprint your personality on if you ever... Her voice failed her. If I ever came home, I completed the sentence. She nodded, eyes glistening. We held on to hope. Ryan refused to let the trail go cold, and I couldn't let go either, because giving up on you felt like amputating a part of him. You are his flesh and blood, which makes you ours, even before we saw your face. Thank you, I managed to whisper. The phrase felt pathetically small against the mountain of her patience, her sacrifice, and her years of waiting. For maintaining this shrine of a room, for keeping the faith, and for loving me simply because she loved my father. She bridged the distance and wrapped me in a hug that felt foreordained, as easy as breathing. Your family, Holden, she murmured into my shoulder. Always were. You just took the scenic route getting here. Ryan and I burned the midnight oil, sitting on the deck with mugs of coffee, dissecting the silence of the last 2 decades. He spoke of his parents, my grandparents, who had died before our reunion, but had yearned for it deeply. "My mother wept when I revealed your existence," he told me. "She claimed her intuition told her you were alive and waiting. She made me swear on her life to keep looking." When she passed 3 years ago, her final command to me was, "Find that boy, Ryan. Bring him back to the fold." He produced photographs of Harold and Margaret Foster. My grandfather was a fellow architect, the root of Ryan's career, while my grandmother was an educator with a passion for horticulture and spoiling kids rotten. They departed this world without ever seeing my face, a tragedy that weighed as heavily as my own lost childhood. "I know I can't rewrite history," Ryan said quietly as my visit drew to a close. We found ourselves settled on the veranda once more, silence wrapping around us as the constellations began to pierce the twilight canopy above the timberline. "I can't rewind the clock, Holden. I can't scrub away the hell you endured," he said softly. "But I'm asking for a chance to step up and be your dad now, if you're open to it. I want to exist in your world, to be the backbone you didn't have, to show up for every milestone I was absent for. The door is unlocked, always. This is your sanctuary as much as it is mine." By the time I headed back to Portland the following morning, everything had shifted. The man driving that car wasn't the same broken soul who had arrived a few days prior. I had a father who had actively chosen me, a stepmother who embraced me without hesitation, and a sister who was already flooding my phone with memes and soccer schedules. For the first time, the concept of home wasn't just a word, it was a feeling. Over the next few weeks, my inbox started pinging with names from the past. Danielle wrote a novel of an email, pouring out regrets, wishing she'd had the courage to speak up, to question the silence back when she was old enough to realize the math didn't add up. She admitted that survivor's guilt had been eating at her for years. She was the one who remained, the one who got the white picket fence and the bedtime stories with parents who actually parented. She asked if there was space for her to know me now. Then came Spencer's call late one evening, his voice cracking and heavy with unsaid things. He confessed that being loved by a father felt like a crime because he knew I was out there starving for that very same affection. He talked about the day I vanished. He was just a kid on the porch, thumb in his mouth, confused but feeling a heavy dread settle in his gut. He told me he'd spent decades trying to bury that image, and he was sorry he hadn't fought harder to track me down and bring me home. Then there was Jenna, the baby of the family, apologizing for a void she couldn't even articulate. Her letter arrived on actual stationery, carrying a ghost of vanilla scent. She wrote about a feeling she'd had her whole life, a glitch in the matrix of our family, a hollow space she could never quite define. "I think my soul always knew I was minus one brother," she wrote. "I just lacked the map to find you. When I was tiny, I had this dream on loop. A boy with green eyes exactly like mine, stranded somewhere far away. I tried to get to him, but obstacles always popped up. A brick wall, a raging river, a door with no handle. I'd wake up sobbing and Mom would soothe me, saying it wasn't real. But it was, wasn't it? It was you. You were the ghost haunting me. I wasn't ready to hand out absolutions. The scars were still too raw, the abandonment too recent in my mind. But I sent a short note back to Jenna. I told her that perhaps, down the road, we could try to be real people to each other. Maybe we could actually be siblings instead of strangers. It was a step forward. A month or so later, I agreed to sit down with my biological mother, Rebecca. We picked a coffee joint in Cedar Falls, Switzerland. No home turf advantage. She beat me there. She was huddled in a window booth, clutching a mug of tea like a lifeline, though she hadn't taken a sip. She looked aged, far more worn than she had at the service, brittle, as if the burden of her lies was finally crushing her spine. "I assume you despise me," she began, her voice trembling. I surprised myself by shaking my head. "I don't hate you," I told her, the realization hitting me with quiet force. "I'm furious. I'm damaged, and I'll be unpacking this trauma for years. But hate? That requires fuel. I'm done wasting my limited energy on you. You made your bed. Now I'm making mine. I have a tribe now. Ryan, Jennifer, Lily. That is my circle. And I am done gaslighting myself into thinking what you did was acceptable, just to ease your conscience. The tears came, predictable as rain. She said she was sorry. She talked about terrible mistakes. She claimed fear and weakness. Can we hit reset? She begged. Let me be your mother, starting today. I thought about the 7-year-old kid who would have sold his soul to hear those words. I thought about the teenager staring at the ceiling, fantasizing about a rescue mission that never came. Then I looked at the man I am today, realizing that some breaks are too clean to ever truly mend. Maybe one day, I said, standing up, but not today. Right now, my energy goes to the people who stood in the fire for me, the ones who didn't let go. You dropped the rope when I was 7. Ryan never stopped pulling. Do you see the difference? She nodded, dabbing at her face. I see it, she whispered, and I am truly sorry. I walked out, leaving her with her cooling tea and her regrets. I felt a weight lift off my chest, lighter than air. I was finished carrying baggage that wasn't mine, finished shrinking myself to fit into their comfortable lies. The paperwork was final. Mitchell was gone. I was Holden Foster again, reclaiming the name and the history that had been stripped away. For the first time, I was laying the foundation of a life that actually belonged to me. 6 months down the road, I marched across the stage at Portland State University, gripping a bachelor's degree in social work. It took 4 years of grinding to get there. Up in the stands, Ryan, Jennifer, and Lily were making enough noise for the whole stadium. They had made the trek from Seattle the previous day, booked a room nearby, and were dead set on treating me to a feast once the speeches were done. Ryan was hoisting a massive poster board that read, Holden's number 1. I wanted to crawl under a rock, but honestly, my heart was bursting. When the dean announced my name, and I started that walk across the platform, Lily's voice cut through the crowd. She was shrieking like she was front row at a stadium tour, not a university hall. Jennifer was a mess of happy tears and applause, and Ryan, he just stood there, hand over his chest, weeping openly. I have never felt that kind of gaze before. Pure, unadulterated pride directed right at me. Once the caps were tossed, I fought my way through the sea of gowns to find them. Ryan grabbed me first. The hug was bone-crushing. I am so proud of you, son, he choked out, his voice cracking. Just look at the man you have become. Later, at the dinner they had arranged downtown, Lily got up to speak. She had swapped her cleats for a dress. It hit me then. She wasn't a kid anymore. She was the sister who had waited a lifetime for a brother she had never seen. She lifted her drink, and the chatter at the table died down. To my brother Holden, she began. You taught me that biology isn't the whole story. Real family is about who shows up. It is about who sticks around when things get ugly, even when the world walks away. She stopped to steady her voice. Holden, you had every reason to be hateful, to be furious. You could have shut the door on us after what you survived, but you didn't. You were brave enough to let us in. You made us whole. By then, the waterworks had started for everyone. Even Ryan was dabbing at his face with a napkin. Here is to you, Lily said, raising her glass higher, and to all the time we have left to make up for. We toasted. Silence settled over the table, comfortable and warm. Just Ryan, Jennifer, Lily, and me. 4 people bridging a gap spanning an ocean of lies, finally connected. The truth had not broken me. It had liberated me. Sure, I lost 16 years, missed birthdays, holidays, mundane Tuesday evenings, soccer matches, and family suppers. 16 years of being someone's son, someone's brother, someone's cherished child. But looking at them, the people who never quit searching, I found the answer I had been chasing my entire life. Home isn't a coordinate on a map where you are born. Home is the people who decide to love you, day in and day out. And I had finally found mine. Thank you for walking this path with me. If this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button. We talk about resilience, second acts, and finding your tribe here. And I want to know your story. Did you find kinship where you least expected it? Did someone hold space for you before you even knew they existed? Drop a comment below. I read every single one. Until next time, be kind to yourselves. And never forget, you deserve truth. You deserve connection. And you deserve a family that picks you every single day. The end. You know, children can survive hunger and cold, but the soul starves without truth and the sense of being chosen. When a child is severed from their roots, the physical distance is not the killer. It is the internal doubt that follows them forever. What did I do to deserve this? Adults often hide secrets to protect everyone, but that silence becomes a prison sentence for the innocent. Let this be a reminder. Grown-up failures should never cost a child their peace of mind. Honesty might sting, but it is the only thing that cures. It is not where you come from that destroys you. It is being denied the right to know your own history and who loves you. An abandoned child internalizes the blame. That scar does not just fade with the calendar pages. But this story proves something else. Love is not bound by DNA. And biology does not guarantee affection. Family is more than lineage. It is the act of seeking, waiting, and choosing someone, no matter how many decades it takes. Seeing things as they truly are might strip away the fantasy, but it offers a release. It allows you to finally set down the weight of your own guilt. It opens the door to finding a tribe of your own making. It renews the belief that every person merits a love with absolutely no condition, right here and now.